I thought Evan Whitmore was going to propose to me the night he told me I wasn't good enough to marry. Even now, that sentence sounds ridiculous. Maybe because the whole evening had been staged so carefully. A private dining room 42 floors above the Chicago River. White linen, candles, floor-to-ceiling glass. A bottle of champagne chilling beside the table, even though Evan knew I hated champagne and had spent years telling him it tasted like expensive regret with bubbles. And next to his plate, a small black box. I saw it before I sat down. Of course I did. We had been together almost 5 years. 2 apartment moves, 1 appendectomy, more charity galas than I could count, enough Sunday dinners with his parents to qualify as unpaid emotional labor. A black box meant something. At least I thought it did. "You're staring," Evan said. "I'm admiring the river. The river's behind me. I'm flexible." He smiled. That smile had gotten him through board meetings, zoning disputes, and most of our arguments. Mostly our arguments. Evan was 35 and polished in the way old money men somehow became polished before they were legally old enough to drink. Dark blonde hair, perfect posture, expensive suit. He could insult someone gently enough that they thanked him on the way out. I had once found that charming. That night, apparently, I still did. He lifted his glass. "To us." My heart started beating harder. "To us." We drank. Then he reached for the box. I tried not to look eager. There is nothing dignified about pretending you do not care about something you have secretly imagined 12 different ways. He opened it. Cufflinks. Silver, monogrammed for himself. I stared. Evan looked pleased. "What do you think?" "They're very cufflink." He laughed. "I knew you'd hate them." "I don't hate them. I'm impressed you managed to surprise yourself." He closed the box. Then his face changed. Not dramatically. Evan never did anything dramatically. That should have warned me. "Naomi, we need to talk." There are sentences capable of ruining any expensive meal. That one has an excellent track record. I set down my glass. "Okay." He folded his hands. "My father and I have been discussing the next phase of the company." I waited. "We're expanding into 3 redevelopment districts next year. There'll be more political scrutiny, more press. Congratulations. This affects me personally." I assumed running the company usually did. He didn't smile. That was when I knew something was wrong. Not what, just wrong. "I'm going to have to take on a larger role." "You've wanted that for years." "I have." He paused. "Which means my personal life matters more than it used to." I stared at him. "You're running for office?" "No." "Joining a cult?" "Naomi." "What?" "I'm narrowing the field." He exhaled. "I love you." My stomach dropped. Some sentences sound reassuring until you hear the word that comes after them. "But," I said. His mouth tightened. "I didn't say but." "You were going to." A waiter appeared with 2 plates and a description involving truffle foam. Neither of us listened. When he left, Evan looked at me again. "You're the woman I love." I waited. "You're just not the woman I can marry." I laughed. One short sound. Not because it was funny, because sometimes your body chooses the wrong emergency response. "I'm sorry?" "You heard me." I did. I was hoping the acoustics were bad. "Naomi, no please, continue." His jaw tightened. "The Whitmore family has expectations. Your family has opinions. Those are not the same thing. You know what I mean." "I really don't." "My mother has spent 5 years acting like I'm temporary. Your father calls my work decorating old buildings. I assumed that was their version of affection." "This isn't about your work." "Then what is it?" He looked away for half a second. That was enough. "My family." Silence. I leaned back. "My mother teaches 7th grade science. My brother repairs elevators. I went to a state university." "Don't make this ugly." I stared at him. "That is an incredible thing to say right now." "I'm trying to be honest." "No, you're trying to sound polite." "Naomi, you want someone from the right family. I need someone who understands the position." "I understand it perfectly." I picked up my napkin and folded it, then folded it again. My hands needed something to do. So I was good enough to live with. That's not fair. Good enough to take to fundraisers. You know that isn't what I mean. Good enough to sleep beside for 5 years. Stop. But not good enough for the photographs. His face hardened. That one landed. Good. Charlotte Bellamy's family has been talking to my father. I went still. Charlotte, 30. Beautiful. Bellamy Capital. I had met her twice. Once at an architecture fundraiser. Once at Evan's parents' Christmas party where she wore red and remembered everyone's name. How long? Nothing has happened. That wasn't my question. Naomi? How long? A few weeks. A few weeks. The cancelled weekend. His father's sudden dinner invitations without me. His mother asking whether I had considered focusing more seriously on my career. The pieces rearranged themselves. I almost admired the coordination. So tonight was what? He looked tired. A conversation we should have had sooner. No, I stood. This was an exit interview. Sit down. I'm not one of your employees. Naomi? I took the apartment key from my bag and placed it beside his untouched plate. His eyes dropped to it. You don't have to do this tonight. You've been doing it for weeks. That isn't true. Then tell Charlotte's family the deal is off. Silence. That was my answer. I nodded. Enjoy the cufflinks. Then I walked out. My legs felt strangely light in the hallway, like they belonged to somebody else. The elevator doors opened. Dante Russo stood inside. Of course, apparently humiliation requires witnesses. Dante was Evan's oldest friend, 38, tall, dark suit, black hair brushed back from a face that always looked faintly unimpressed with the world. People called him a hotel investor. People who knew better tended not to call him anything. He looked at my face, then toward the dining room behind me. Bad dinner? Excellent truffle fond. His eyes stayed on mine. I hated that they were kind. Do you need a car? No. Naomi? I'm capable of ordering one. I know. That stopped me. No pity. No performance. Just I know. The elevator arrived. I stepped inside. Dante stayed outside. Then he said, for what it's worth, he's an idiot. I looked at him. You're his best friend. Those statements are not mutually exclusive. The doors closed. I laughed despite myself, then cried in the elevator, quietly, which felt annoyingly cinematic. At home, I packed one suitcase, toothbrush, laptop, 3 shirts, underwear. The ugly sweatshirt Evan hated. Apparently, rebellion has a dress code. Then I noticed the mail. Mine was missing. I checked the drawer where we kept forwarding notices. There it was, a USPS change of address confirmation. My name, effective date, 3 weeks earlier. Forwarding address, my office. I stared at it. Evan had removed my mail from our shared apartment before he ever sat me down at dinner. 3 weeks. The breakup had not happened that night. That night was only when he informed me. I put the notice in my bag, then looked around the apartment I had helped furnish, paint, organize, and convince myself belonged equally to both of us. Something inside me went very still. Evan had decided I wasn't good enough to marry. Fine. But he had also decided I was too stupid to notice being quietly removed from my own life. That part, I intended to correct. 3 weeks after Evan told me I wasn't the kind of woman he could marry, his engagement announcement appeared in the Sunday Society section. Charlotte Bellamy. Of course. I found out while standing in line for coffee. The woman ahead of me was scrolling through a phone when Evan's face appeared on the screen. I recognized him before I had time to recognize what I was looking at. Whitmore, heir, engaged to Bellamy, Capital Director. I stared over a stranger's shoulder like a criminal with excellent posture. Charlotte looked beautiful. Evan looked relieved. That was the part that got me. Not happy. Relieved. As if whatever inconvenience I had represented had finally been removed from the schedule. The caption said they had recently reconnected. Recently. A useful little word. It can mean last Tuesday. It can also mean while your girlfriend is still choosing paint samples for the bedroom. Ma'am? I looked up. The barista was staring at me. Sorry, your order? Oh, right. What can I get you? Something vindictive. He blinked. Large black? Perfect. I took the coffee and went to work. Reed Preservation Studio occupied the second floor of a converted warehouse in Fulton Market. 9 employees. Historic restoration, adaptive reuse, architectural consulting. I had built the firm from 2 folding tables, borrowed software, and a printer that jammed whenever anyone displayed optimism. That office mattered to me more than Evan's apartment ever had, which was why the first canceled contract hurt. The client called at 10, budget concerns. At 11:15, another project suddenly had a change in direction. By Friday, 3 jobs connected in some way to Whitmore Development had disappeared. My operations manager, Luis, stood in my doorway holding a spreadsheet. This isn't random, I know. You want me to say it? No. Evan, I specifically asked you not to say it. You look like you want to stab Excel. Excel didn't date me. Luis sat. Can they actually do this? They can stop giving us work. And pressure other people not to? I looked at him. That's harder to prove. He leaned back. For what it's worth, I never liked him. You invited him to your wedding. My mother invited him. She likes tall men with dental insurance. I laughed. Small mercy. Then my phone rang. Dante Russo. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. Did Evan die? A pause. No. Then this call is already disappointing. I need an architect. You own architects. I employ firms. Same thing. No. His voice had that calm quality I found mildly irritating. I bought the Calumet House. I sat straighter. The Calumet House was a 1920s hotel and jazz venue on the south side, abandoned for 15 years. Beautiful bones. Terrible wiring. A preservation nightmare. I had wanted to restore it since graduate school. You bought it? Yes. Why? I enjoy asbestos. Finally, an honest developer. I want you to lead the restoration. I stared at the wall. No. Another pause. Why? Because I'm not taking pity work from Evan's best friend. It isn't pity. It smells like pity. You haven't seen the contract. I can smell expensive pity through email. Dante exhaled. Fine. Fine? I'll open it to competitive bid. That stopped me. What? You want to earn it? Yes. Then earn it. The call ended. I stared at my phone. Luis appeared in the doorway. Who was that? Dante Russo. His eyebrows climbed. The Dante Russo? Hamate Russo? How many do you know? The one who owns half the restaurants where nobody asks for itemized receipts? That sounds defamatory. It sounds observant. I submitted the bid. So did 6 other firms. For 2 weeks I forgot about Evan. Mostly. The Calumet House gave me something more useful to obsess over. Structural reports, historic tax credits, original plasterwork, a ballroom ceiling hidden beneath acoustic tile, the kind of work that reminds you buildings can survive terrible renovations if someone cares enough to uncover what was there before. When Dante's office called, I assumed we had lost. You've been selected, his assistant said. I checked the email twice. Was I cheapest? No. Did Dante interfere? No. Would you tell me if he had? No. Fair. Our first project meeting took place inside the abandoned hotel. Dante arrived in a charcoal coat with 2 men behind him. Not assistants. Security. They stayed near the entrance. I looked at them. Are they here because of the mold? They're terrified of historic plaster. Reasonable. Dante handed me a hard hat. You won honestly. I know. You looked like you needed confirmation. I looked like I needed coffee. That too. We spent 3 hours walking the property. Dante knew more about the building than I expected. He knew which ballroom had hosted jazz bands during Prohibition, which stairwell had been sealed after a fire, which families had once owned the surrounding parcels. At one point, a union representative arrived without warning. He came in loud. Then he saw Dante. His voice changed immediately, not quieter exactly. More careful. I noticed. I didn't comment yet. 2 weeks into the project, I stayed late reviewing old digital drawings. One file caught my eye, Whitmore Development, a redevelopment parcel from 8 months earlier. My firm had consulted on facade preservation. I opened the metadata. Revision approved, Naomi Reed. Date, 6 days after I moved out of Evan's apartment. I stared at the screen. I had not approved anything after the breakup. I downloaded the file. Then another. Same thing. My electronic approval code. My initials. Wrong date. My stomach tightened. Luis walked over. You okay? No. He leaned toward the screen. What is that? Apparently I've been working overtime without telling myself. I pulled up our access logs. My credentials had been used remotely, from an external device. I checked the IP history. One address belonged to a Whitmore development office. My fingers went cold. Evan had not only removed me from his apartment before ending our relationship. Someone inside his company had continued using my professional credentials afterward. I printed the log. Then Dante's voice came from behind me. What did you find? I turned too quickly. He stood in the doorway. No coat, no security. His eyes moved to the paper in my hand. Something in his face changed. Barely, but enough. You know what this is, I said. He didn't answer. My chest tightened. Dante. He looked at me. I know what it might be. That was all. But it was enough to change the room. The Calumet House had stopped feeling like a fresh start. Now it felt like I had stepped into a game that had already begun before anyone bothered to explain the rules to me. I didn't ask Dante what he knew that night. I wanted to. Instead, I went home, ate cereal over the sink, and spent 3 hours proving I wasn't imagining things. 7 approval codes. 5 Whitmore projects. 3 subcontractors I had never worked with. Every one of them carried my credentials. I made a spreadsheet. Apparently anger likes columns. The next morning I called Evan. He answered on the fourth ring. Naomi, someone used my professional credentials. Silence. What are you talking about? Whitmore projects. After I moved out. That's impossible. Great, then explaining it should be easy. You still had consulting authority. No, I didn't. You may have approved revisions before the separation. I know when I worked, Evan. His voice cooled. Are you accusing me of something? I'm asking whether your company used my credentials without permission. Be careful. There it was, that tone. The one that used to make junior executives sit straighter and contractors suddenly remember deadlines. It worked less well once you had watched the man leave wet towels on a bathroom floor for 5 years. Was that a threat? It was advice. I've had better. I hung up. My hand was shaking slightly. That annoyed me. Not because I was afraid of Evan exactly, because some part of my body still remembered that he used to be the person I called when things went wrong. Habits are embarrassing that way. Dante was already at the Calumet house when I arrived. You called him. I stopped. How do you know? You look irritated. I always look irritated around developers. You look specifically irritated. I walked past him. If you start having me followed, I'm billing you for the time. He fell into step beside me. I'm not having you followed. Good. Evan probably is. I stopped again. What? He monitors people when he thinks they can create exposure. You say that like it's normal. In his family it is. In yours? Dante looked at me. Different methods. That was not reassuring. We spent the morning inspecting the old ballroom. A section of ceiling plaster had fallen overnight, leaving dust over half the floor. Dante climbed onto the lower scaffold before I could stop him. You have people for that. I have legs. You also have expensive shoes. He looked down at them. They're insured. Of course they are. He laughed. That surprised me. Dante rarely laughed in front of other people. When he did, he looked younger. Less like the man everyone watched before deciding how loudly they were allowed to speak. That version of him was almost more unsettling. Around noon, 3 union representatives showed up to argue over crew assignments. One of them, Tommy, came in loud. He stayed loud for approximately 30 seconds. Then Dante looked at him. Not aggressively, just long enough. Tommy's volume dropped. Dante listened to the complaints for 5 minutes, then said, Tommy, your guys get the east wing. Luis keeps the ballroom. Nobody touches electrical until Naomi signs off. Tommy opened his mouth. Dante looked at him again. Tommy closed it. Meeting over. I stared at Dante. That was deeply democratic. Everyone got a chance to speak. Briefly, he shrugged. People listened to Dante because he paid them, and because some of them were afraid not to. I was beginning to understand that both things could be true at once. A week later, the Calumet Project held a donor preview. Historic preservation people, developers, politicians, rich people pretending cracked plaster was charming because someone had put candles nearby. I wore a black dress and spent most of the evening regretting shoes designed by somebody with a personal grievance against women. Then Evan arrived with Charlotte. Of course, she looked elegant. He looked comfortable. I hated that I noticed. Charlotte approached first. Naomi? Charlotte? I've heard wonderful things about the restoration. Thank you. There was no smugness in her voice. That somehow made the whole situation more complicated. Evan joined us. Dante's keeping you busy. I charge hourly. His smile tightened. I'm glad you landed somewhere. There it was, landed, like I had fallen and someone had been kind enough to catch me. I was under the impression I won the contract. Of course. Charlotte glanced at him. Evan continued. I just hope you're being careful. With plaster? With Dante. I smiled. You've been his best friend since prep school. That's exactly why I'm warning you. Interesting advertisement for friendship. Dante appeared beside me. He had clearly heard enough. Evan, Dante. Something changed in the space between them. Charlotte noticed too. Evan took a sip of whiskey. Naomi always did like difficult projects. I turned toward him. What does that mean? Nothing. No. You made the effort. Finish it. His mouth curved. I'm just surprised. 5 years with me, 3 weeks single, and now you're attached to Dante. I went still. The room around us didn't become silent. It just felt that way. There are private humiliations, and then there are men who make sure important people are standing close enough to hear. Attached? You're together constantly. He's my client. For now. Dante's expression hardened. I touched his sleeve before he spoke. Not because he needed stopping, because I didn't want this resolved in whatever language men like Dante used when they stopped pretending to be businessmen. I looked at Evan. You told me I wasn't good enough to marry. Charlotte froze. Evan's smile disappeared. So I left. Naomi? No, let's be accurate. I didn't cheat. I didn't overlap engagements. I didn't reconnect with somebody while another woman's toothbrush was still in my bathroom. Charlotte looked at Evan, just for a second. But I saw it. Good. And if I date someone tomorrow, I said, the only permission I'll need is mine. People nearby suddenly became fascinated by their drinks. I turned away. My hand started shaking the second I reached the hallway. Dante followed. You okay? No. Do you want me to? No. I hadn't finished. I know exactly how that sentence ends with you. His mouth twitched. Probably. I leaned against the wall. I hate that he can still do that. Do what? Make me feel like I need to prove I'm not pathetic. Dante was quiet for a moment. You don't. I looked at him. That was almost inspirational. I can make it worse. I believe you. A beat passed. Then he said, dinner. What? With me? We're technically at dinner. This is canapés and wealthy people lying. Fair. Tomorrow night. I studied him. Is this a date? Yes. You're Evan's best friend. Historically. That sounds ominous. It's accurate. I thought about saying no, for several sensible reasons. Then I thought about Evan standing in that ballroom as if leaving him had somehow transferred ownership of my choices back to him. 7:30, I said. Dante nodded. Good. And I'm paying for myself. No. Then it's not a date. He stared at me. You negotiate romance like a contractor. I negotiate everything like a contractor. He almost smiled. 7:30. I walked back toward the ballroom. My hands had finally stopped shaking. I wasn't saying yes to punish Evan. That would have made him far too important. I said yes because Dante asked me a question and waited for my answer. At the time, I didn't understand how much that distinction was going to matter. Dating a mafia boss was less glamorous than people imagined. Mostly it involved arguing about transportation. For our first date, Dante arrived in a black sedan with a driver. I stopped on the sidewalk. No. He looked at the car. What? I'm not getting into that. It has 4 doors. It also has a man in the front seat who looks like he knows where bodies are buried. The driver glanced at me in the mirror, offended. Dante sighed. Anthony has feelings. Wonderful, he can process them from the curb. So we walked. Dante hated every second of it. Chicago in November does not reward principle. By the 3rd block, I could no longer feel my ears. You happy? He asked. Extremely. You're shivering. I'm expressing independence. You're expressing poor judgment. I laughed. That was date 1. Date 2 involved pasta at a restaurant Dante owned but insisted he barely controlled. The chef visited our table twice. The manager came over 3 times. A man at the bar left the moment Dante looked at him. I raised an eyebrow. Barely. He ignored me. By the 3rd date, I was tired of eating in rooms where everybody knew who he was before I sat down. So Dante came to my apartment. He offered to cook. That was a mistake. I cut into the chicken. What did you do to this? I cooked it. You threatened it. It's fine. It has the texture of drywall. You restore buildings. I thought you'd appreciate the familiar material. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my glass. Dante stared at the plate. Order pizza? Already did. His eyes narrowed. You planned for failure. I've dated men before. The relationship moved slowly. That mattered. Dante did not rescue me from Evan. He did not buy my company. He did not call clients and bully them back into working with me. He offered once. I could fix this, he said. We were standing in the Calumet House ballroom, surrounded by scaffolding and dust. No. It would take 2 calls. That's exactly why the answer is no. He frowned. Explain. You think fixing something and controlling it are the same thing. He went quiet. The sentence landed harder than I intended. For a second, I regretted it. Not because it was wrong. Because it felt personal. Then Dante nodded. I'll stay out of it, and he did. That mattered more than flowers would have. Meanwhile, Luis and I kept digging through the Whitmore approvals. The problem got worse. 23 invoices, all tied to subcontractors I had either never worked with or barely recognized. Lakeview Restoration Partners, Mid-Central Procurement, North Shore Site Services. very respectable names, which made me distrust them immediately. The payment amounts bothered Priya Shah, the forensic accountant I hired. $94,500, $97,800, $91,200. Always just under internal review thresholds. Priya scanned the spreadsheet for 15 minutes. This smells terrible. Financially, also spiritually. I liked her immediately. The money started in Whitmore redevelopment accounts. Then it moved through subcontractors, then consulting companies. Some had no real employees. Some shared addresses with labor intermediaries. Others were tied to private security firms. And one name kept appearing. Russo Hospitality Group. I stared at the screen. Dante? Priya looked at me. You know him? Unfortunately. That sounded personal. It is becoming complicated. Those are my favorite spreadsheets. I did not laugh. That evening I found Dante at the Calumet house. He was talking with a contractor near the ballroom stage. I waited until they finished. Then I held up the printout. What is this? Dante looked at it. His expression changed, only slightly, but I saw it. You know, Naomi, how much? Not here. No. He glanced toward the workers nearby. Naomi. Do not use my name like a door you can close. A few people looked over. Dante lowered his voice. My company received payments from Whitmore-controlled contractors. For what? Security, labor coordination, site access. Real services? A pause. Some. I let out a short laugh. Great. Listen. No, you listen. I stepped closer. My credentials approved invoices that eventually sent money into companies connected to you. I didn't authorize your approvals. That is not what I asked. His jaw tightened. Did you know Evan was using my name? I suspected something was wrong. My stomach went cold. How long? He didn't answer quickly enough. Before you hired me? Yes. Everything inside me went quiet. That was almost worse than anger. You knew. I knew Whitmore was routing money through shell contractors. And you thought my credentials were connected. Yes. So you hired me because you were the best architect for the Calumet project. Finish the sentence. He looked at me, and because I thought you might recognize the pattern, I stared at him. It wasn't the only reason, he said. I don't care. Naomi. I spent 5 years with a man who decided what I was allowed to know based on what was useful to him. That isn't what I did. No? My voice cracked slightly. I hated that. You brought me into a project knowing my professional identity might be tied to fraud, and you said nothing. You earned the contract. That does not make the rest disappear. He said nothing. There was the answer. Different man, different suit. Same assumption, that I would be easier to manage if I had less information. I grabbed my coat. Where are you going? Home. We need to talk. You need to talk. I need to leave. Naomi, there's more. I stopped. Of course there was. What? My brother Marco found the same payment pattern before he died. I turned. What does that have to do with me? I think the Whitmores were moving money through the same subcontractors. Marco started documenting it. His death was an accident. Dante's face changed. No. One word. No drama. Just certainty. The scaffolding that failed had passed inspection 3 days earlier, he said. Marco had copies of invoices tied to Whitmore contractors. They disappeared after he died. My anger shifted. Not gone, just moved. And you thought I could lead you back to them? Yes. I nodded slowly. You should have told me. I know. When? From the beginning. You know that now. His eyes stayed on mine. I knew it then. That hurt more. I stepped back. You were honest 5 minutes too late. Then I walked out. 3 blocks later, Priya called. You need to come to the office. What happened? There are federal investigators here. My stomach dropped. For Whitmore? A pause. No. Another. For you. Federal investigators are disappointingly polite when they are ruining your week. 2 agents sat across from me in the conference room. Dark suits. Neat folders. One of them even apologized for arriving without warning. I almost admired the manners. Luis stood near the door looking like he wanted to fight the federal government with a stapler. Priya sat beside me with her laptop open. Rachel Cohen, my attorney, joined by video from New York and immediately looked annoyed on my behalf. That helped. The agents placed copies of invoices on the table. My approval code appeared on every one. Millions in redevelopment funds, shell contractors, consulting payments, kickbacks disguised as project expenses. You recognize these credentials? One agent asked. Yes. They belong to you? Yes. Did you approve these transactions? No. He wrote something down. I hated the pen. Could anyone else access your authentication token? Not legitimately. Were you in a relationship with Evan Whitmore during the period these approvals were issued? My stomach tightened. Yes. Did he have access to your home computer or other devices? Before I could answer, Rachel cut in. We're done discussing devices until I review the subpoena language. The agent nodded, still polite. I wanted him rude. Rudeness would have been easier to hate. By that afternoon, the story leaked. Architect linked to redevelopment kickback probe. My name, my company. A photograph from an old preservation award where I looked cheerful and hopeful. That felt almost insulting. 3 clients called before 5. 2 paused projects. 1 terminated. The next morning, the bank froze my business credit line pending review. By Friday, I had enough cash for about 6 weeks of payroll. Luis stood in my office holding another spreadsheet. You can cut me. No. I mean salary. No. Naomi, we'll figure it out. That sentence is how small firms die. So is firing the people keeping them alive. He looked at me for a long moment. You're terrible at self-preservation. I restore old buildings. It's occupational. I laughed. He didn't. That was when I almost cried. Not when the agents arrived. Not when the headline went up. When Luis looked scared for me. I waited until everyone left that evening. Then I took our brass company plaque off the hallway wall because the landlord had asked us to minimize publicity. I sat on the floor holding it. Reed Preservation Studio. 9 years. It was heavier than it looked. My phone buzzed. Dante. I ignored it. Again. Ignored. Then a text. I can help. I laughed out loud. Of course he could. Men like Dante always could. That was exactly why I didn't want him to. I typed, "Do not fix this for me." He answered almost immediately. I wasn't going to. Then I have records you need. I stared at the screen. My first instinct was to tell him to keep them. My second was less dramatic and more useful. Send them to Rachel. He did. No argument. No phone call. No attempt to make me grateful. That mattered. The records showed payments between Whitmore-controlled companies and Russo businesses. Some were legitimate, some were not. Security contracts, labor access, protection payments, cash disguised as consulting. Rachel read everything twice. He's implicating himself. Yes. Does he understand that? He isn't stupid. Good. One less variable. Then Charlotte Bellamy called me. I almost hung up. Naomi, please? I closed my eyes. People really need new opening lines. I know. What do you want? To meet? No, I have messages from Evan. That stopped me. What kind? The kind where he tells his CFO to keep using your approvals. Silence. Where? Public. Good. We met at a cafe near Lincoln Park. Charlotte wore sunglasses even though the sky was gray. I almost made a comment. Then I saw her face. She looked exhausted. Not messy. Not broken. Just tired in a way makeup could not quite hide. She placed her phone on the table. Here. Screenshots. Evan to his CFO. Keep read approvals active until compliance closes Q4. Another. Use prior authorization profile. She won't challenge while negotiations are ongoing. I read that one twice. Negotiations? Charlotte swallowed. Our engagement. My mouth went dry. He was using my credentials while negotiating marriage with you. Yes. I leaned back. Romance is alive. She almost smiled. Then she opened another file. My family's fund invested $80 million in Whitmore redevelopment vehicles after the engagement. I looked up. That was when it clicked. That's why. What? You weren't replacing me because you were better. Charlotte's expression tightened. No. You were financing them. Yes. The cruelty of it surprised me. Not because I wanted Charlotte hurt. Because Evan had built a system where 2 women were encouraged to believe one had won and the other had lost. Neither of us had won. We had just been useful in different ways. Why are you helping me? She looked down at her hands. 2 nights ago, I asked Evan whether he used your credentials. And he told me not to involve myself in things I didn't understand. I let out a quiet laugh. Classic. Then he said if I embarrassed him publicly, my father's fund could lose its position in the redevelopment deals. That stopped being romance? It probably never was. For the first time, I felt something toward Charlotte that wasn't resentment. Recognition. She slid a flash drive toward me. Copies of messages, investment records, calendar entries. Does Evan know you took them? No. Good. A pause. Naomi, I looked at her. I'm sorry. I hated apologies, especially sincere ones. You knew about me. Yes, and you still got engaged? Yes. Why? She looked away. Because my father told me it was the smartest marriage I could make. There it was, different family, same disease. I nodded slowly. I'm not ready to forgive you. I'm not asking you to. Good answer. We sat in silence for a while. Then Charlotte said, there's something else. Of course there was. What? Evan keeps mentioning an archive connected to Dante's brother. My pulse changed. What archive? I don't know, but last night I heard Richard say something. Richard Whitmore? She nodded. What? Charlotte looked directly at me. He said, Marco should have taught them what happens when people keep copies. I went still. Those exact words? Yes. My stomach tightened. Dante believed Marco had discovered the same financial pattern before he died. Now Richard Whitmore had casually confirmed that Marco had kept evidence. And suddenly my professional scandal felt smaller, not unimportant, just part of something older, something with history. Someone had already died inside this story. And for the first time, I had to seriously ask whether Marco Russo's death had ever been an accident at all. Charlotte and I became allies in the least inspiring way possible. We didn't hug, we didn't become best friends over wine. We made folders, a ridiculous number of folders. Charlotte understood Whitmore finance. I understood construction records. Priya could follow money through 6 shell companies without developing a headache. Rachel understood which discoveries were useful evidence and which ones would get us sued if I repeated them in public. It worked better than friendship probably would have. For 2 weeks, we rebuilt the scheme piece by piece. Whitmore Development received redevelopment funds through legitimate projects. Those projects hired real contractors, but mixed among them were shell subcontractors billing for inflated work, or work that never happened. The extra money moved again: consulting companies, labor intermediaries, political fixers, security firms. Some payments eventually reached Russo businesses for access, protection, and what one invoice charmingly called labor stability. Priya stared at that one. Labor stability. Sounds peaceful. It usually isn't. Eventually, the numbers brought us back to Marco Russo. Rachel arranged the meeting with Dante. Her rule was simple: no private conversations about evidence. Dante agreed without argument. That alone felt like progress. He arrived with an old photograph. Marco was 31 in it. Same dark eyes as Dante. Much easier smile. He handled construction logistics for one of my companies, Dante said. Legal logistics? I asked. Mostly. Rachel looked over her glasses. Dante sighed. Legal enough that his work isn't the problem we're discussing. Deeply reassuring. Marco had started noticing subcontractors collecting money for jobs he couldn't verify. Then he found something worse: inspection certificates, scaffolding reports, concrete testing. Several had been altered or backdated so projects could advance faster and funding could be released before work actually met requirements. Marco wanted out, Dante said. Out of the company? Out of everything. I looked at him. Your organization? Yes. That answer surprised me. He'd talked to an attorney. He was considering going federal. Charlotte leaned forward. You knew that? Not until after he died. Dante looked down at the photograph. He kept copies, enough that somebody got nervous. And then the scaffolding failed. Yes. Was it sabotaged? We never proved that. What do you believe? Dante looked at me. I believe my brother found something Richard Whitmore couldn't afford to have examined. And Evan? I don't know. That was the first answer from Dante that made me trust him a little more. He didn't pretend certainty just because certainty would make revenge easier. Charlotte opened her laptop. I found something that may help. An old email appeared on the screen. Evan to a Whitmore project manager. Marco R. has become a liability. Dad wants his site access restricted immediately. 4 days before Marco died. Dante stood so quickly his chair scraped across the floor. His face emptied. That scared me more than anger would have. He knew. Dante, Rachel said. He knew. You don't know what he knew, I said. He looked at me. He called my brother a liability. That proves he wanted Marco off the project. It doesn't prove he ordered the scaffolding to fail. Dante moved toward the door. I stepped in front of him. Move. No. Naomi, no. His eyes changed, not toward me exactly. Through me. I had seen men around Dante react to that look. I understood why, but I stayed where I was. If you walk out of here right now, what happens? You don't want the answer. I already know it. Silence. You want to hurt him. Dante said nothing. Charlotte looked down at the table. Rachel stayed very still. I lowered my voice. Maybe Evan deserves your anger. Maybe Richard deserves worse. But if you go after them your way, what happens to Marco? Dante's jaw tightened. They pay. No, you pay. Marco becomes a sentence in an article about why Dante Russo finally snapped. His eyes stayed on mine. You think the courts are gonna fix this? No. That stopped him. I think courts fail. I think money buys delay. I think good lawyers can make obvious things look uncertain. Then why should I trust them? You shouldn't trust them. Trust evidence. He looked away. I continued. If you kill Evan, people will spend years arguing about you. If we prove what the Whitmores did, they have to answer for themselves. A long silence. Then I said, let Marco be the reason the truth comes out, not the excuse for another body. Something in Dante shifted. Slowly, he returned to the chair. What do you need? Rachel reopened her laptop. Records. How many? All of them. Dante gave a short laugh. That's not a number. Payments, contracts, internal messages, security invoices, anything that touched Whitmore funds. That exposes my companies. Yes. People could go to prison. Rachel didn't soften it. You could go to prison. Dante looked at me. This was the part that mattered. Not whether he wanted me. Not whether he hated Evan. Whether he was willing to tell the truth when the truth came with a price tag attached to his own name. He nodded. I'll turn it over. Everything connected to Whitmore? Charlotte asked. Rachel shook her head. Everything connected to those transactions, even where Whitmore isn't named. Dante looked at her. You're very unpleasant. I'm not your attorney. Thank God. The records began arriving through counsel 3 days later. They did not make Dante look good. Cash from illegal gambling mixed through restaurant revenue, security companies collecting protection payments, Whitmore contractors paying for labor peace that looked suspiciously like buying the right not to have problems. Dante had not invented the scheme. He had participated in pieces of it. He never denied that. I noticed. Then Priya found the payments. A Whitmore shell had transferred money to a small equipment contractor responsible for maintaining the scaffolding at Marco's site. $75,000, 2 days before the collapse. $125,000 the morning after. No invoice, no work order, no explanation. Charlotte covered her mouth. Dante didn't move. Rachel studied the screen. This still isn't proof of murder. I know, I said. Then Priya opened the metadata attached to the payment authorization. A short notation appeared. Project Instruction Authorization, E.W. Evan Whitmore. Nobody spoke. Dante's hands closed into fists. Then after a few seconds he forced them open. He looked at me. Defendant. I frowned. What? You said if we prove it, he becomes a defendant. Yes. His eyes went back to Evan's initials. Then we prove it. That mattered more to me than any threat Dante could have made. For once, the most powerful man in the room had chosen evidence over violence. And somewhere in Chicago, without knowing it yet, the Whitmores had just become much more vulnerable. The first person to break was our witness. Paul Mercer had spent 17 years managing Whitmore construction projects. 58. Divorced, 2 daughters. The kind of man who still carried printed schedules because he didn't trust phones. He had approved the contractor connected to Marco's scaffolding. He also agreed to meet Rachel privately. Then he stopped answering, not disappeared. Nothing dramatic. Calls went to voicemail. Emails went unread. 2 days later, his attorney sent Rachel a letter stating that Paul had misremembered certain material events. Rachel read the sentence aloud. I stared at her. People misremember $200,000? Apparently. Charlotte looked sick. Evan got to him. Maybe, Rachel said. Dante gave a humorless laugh. Definitely. Rachel looked at him. And this is why you are not allowed to solve witness problems. I know. Do you? No. At almost the same time, the Whitmore public relations machine came alive. Articles appeared describing me as a bitter ex-girlfriend who had joined forces with Dante to punish Evan. One headline called me the architect at the center of a romantic revenge scandal. I sent it to Luis. He replied, "At least they called you an architect." Perspective. I laughed once. Then Evan filed a civil complaint, claiming I had improperly accessed Whitmore records after our breakup. Completely backward. Still expensive. 3 more clients terminated contracts. My professional liability insurer began reviewing whether they wanted to continue covering my firm. I stopped sleeping properly. Not in some dramatic, tortured way. I just started waking at 3:17 every morning. Always 3:17. My body apparently appreciated consistency while ruining my life. During the day, I worked. The Calumet House was approaching reopening, and for a few hours at a time, the building gave me somewhere useful to put my brain. The restored ballroom was beautiful. Original plasterwork, a rebuilt stage, brass fixtures we had cleaned instead of replacing, deep green walls matched from paint fragments found behind paneling installed in the 70s. The first night we turned on the finished lighting, I cried. Luis pretended not to notice. Dust, I said. Inside? Historic dust. Very emotional dust. The reopening gala was scheduled for Saturday. 200 guests, preservation donors, press, city officials. Dante wanted to cancel. No, Naomi, no. There have been threats. There are always threats around you. This is different. You've been saying that since our third date. He didn't smile. This isn't funny, I know. That took the humor out of me. He looked toward the ballroom. You don't have to prove anything. I'm not proving anything. Then what are you doing? Opening the building I spent a year restoring. Our building. I looked at him. He sighed. The building. Better. The gala began at 7. By 8:30 I had almost convinced myself the night might be normal. Charlotte came alone. No engagement ring. I noticed. I didn't ask. Dante wore a tuxedo and looked deeply offended every time someone asked for a photograph. That helped. At 9:12 the fire alarm went off. For the first few seconds, nobody moved. Rich people hear alarms and assume someone else has already been assigned to the problem. Then smoke pushed through the service corridor. The room changed instantly. Staff began moving guests toward the exits. Someone shouted for security. Luis grabbed my arm when I turned toward the archive room. Absolutely not. The original project records are back there. Then they burn. Luis, no. I hated that he was right. Then one of the kitchen employees came stumbling out of the corridor, coughing. Maria's still back there. That changed the decision. I went. Not for records. For Maria. The smoke was thicker near the rear offices. My eyes watered almost immediately. Visibility dropped to a few feet. I pulled a linen napkin over my nose and mouth. Probably useless. Still better than nothing. I found Maria in the staff restroom. She was sitting on the floor coughing, one shoe off. I twisted my ankle. We're leaving. I can't walk. You can complain about my technique afterward. I got her arm over my shoulder and pulled her upright. We moved slowly, painfully slowly. Somewhere behind us, glass shattered. The main service corridor had filled with smoke. Then I remembered something from the original plans. A narrow maintenance passage had once served a dumbwaiter shaft and had been reopened during restoration to access plumbing. I turned us around. Maria started cursing in Spanish. I understood enough to know she had serious concerns about my judgment. Put it in my performance review. We found the passage, then the stairwell, then cold air. Outside, firefighters took Maria from me. I stood on the sidewalk coughing hard enough that my ribs hurt. Dante came running toward me. I had never seen his face like that. Not angry, not controlled, afraid. He grabbed my shoulders. Are you hurt? I'm fine. You went back inside. Maria was inside. I know. How? Luis told me. He looked like he wanted to yell. Instead, he pulled me against him. For a second, I let him. Then something hard pressed against my ribs inside my coat. I stepped back. The backup drive. At some point while helping Maria out of the archive corridor, I had grabbed it from the desk. Completely unnecessary. Possibly stupid. Very on brand. I held it up. Dante stared at me. You are insane. I prefer thorough. The fire marshal approached a few minutes later. The fire had started in the archive area. Electrical systems appeared intact. There were signs of an accelerant, not an accident. Charlotte arrived beside us, pale. Rachel showed up 20 minutes later, because apparently attorneys can smell liability across city limits. She took the drive from me. From now on, chain of custody. Yes, Mom. Do not make me dislike you. You already do. I tolerate you professionally. The drive contained scans of every invoice and inspection record. But much of the original paper archive was badly damaged. By the next morning, Evan's attorneys were already arguing that digital copies could have been altered. Then Charlotte's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Stopped breathing for a second. What? I asked. She turned the phone toward us. A message from Evan. Sent the afternoon before the gala. Tomorrow night needs to be clean. No loose archive. No surprises. Charlotte looked at me. He knew. Dante's jaw tightened. Rachel took the phone. Maybe. Dante gave her a look. You lawyers love that word. We love convictions that survive appeals. Behind us, firefighters were still moving through the hotel. Black water ran down the front steps. I looked at the building I'd spent a year bringing back. For months, Evan had tried to make me feel embarrassed, unqualified, vindictive, disposable. Standing there with smoke still in my hair, I finally understood something else. He wasn't trying to embarrass me anymore. He was afraid of what I could prove. And that felt very different. The fire gave Evan about 36 hours of confidence. Then Dennis Harlow flipped. He owned Harlow Mechanical and had handled maintenance work on Whitmore projects for more than a decade. Federal investigators picked him up on tax charges that had nothing to do with the fire. By Monday morning, Dennis wanted a lawyer. By Monday afternoon, he wanted a deal. Rachel called me a little after 6. Sit down. I'm already sitting. Good, Harlow is cooperating. My pulse jumped. About what? Enough to ruin several people's week. Dennis admitted a Whitmore executive had paid him to disable the archive room suppression system before the gala. He had not started the fire. Another subcontractor had done that. But Dennis had removed the thing designed to stop a small fire from becoming a disaster. Who ordered it? I asked. Rachel paused. Richard. My stomach tightened. And Evan? He knew. How do you know? Rachel glanced off screen. Charlotte. I looked across my apartment. Charlotte was sitting on the couch with her laptop open. We had somehow become that kind of strange. She held up her phone. I found the rest. 3 days before the fire, Evan had texted her. Dad is handling the archive issue. Once it's clean, the Reed problem becomes manageable. Reed problem. Me. I stared at the message. Nice branding. Charlotte didn't smile. He sent that while he was in bed next to me. That hurt. Not for me, for her. I asked what he meant, she said. He told me it was business. Of course he did. Then she showed us another message. Sent after the fire. Archive situation resolved. Keep your father calm. Rachel read it twice. This helps. Enough? Maybe. Dante stood near the window. He had barely spoken. Federal investigators had also started reviewing Russo records. His records. Illegal gambling, protection payments, labor influence, shell companies. The cost of telling the truth had finally reached his own door. Your lawyer called, I said. I know. What happens now? I cooperate. And then? Depends. Prison? Possible. Charlotte looked at him. You're just accepting that? Dante turned. No. Then what are you doing? I'm accepting that I did what I did. The answer settled something inside me. Evan had spent months calling everything complicated whenever responsibility got too close. Dante didn't. He just said I did it. That mattered. 2 weeks later, federal agents raided Whitmore Development. The footage hit television before breakfast. Boxes, computers, agents moving through the lobby. Richard Whitmore used a private garage and still somehow managed to look personally offended by federal authority. Evan was arrested at his office. No screaming, no dramatic chase. 2 agents walked beside him while cameras waited outside. He saw Charlotte first. She stood across the street with Rachel. His face changed. Charlotte. She didn't move. Then he saw me. There was no regret in his expression. No love either. Just disbelief. He had genuinely assumed I would stay manageable. That was almost funny. The charges came quickly. Wire fraud, bribery, obstruction, conspiracy connected to the archive fire. False statements, financial crimes tied to redevelopment funds. Richard faced racketeering-related charges, witness intimidation, bribery, and obstruction. Then Marco Russo's case reopened. Dennis admitted Richard had paid him years earlier to falsify a maintenance record after Marco's scaffolding collapse. Another contractor told investigators that several bolts had been deliberately replaced with lower-grade hardware before Marco's inspection. He claimed he had been told only to create a failure, not necessarily kill anyone. That distinction made me feel sick. Evan's old email calling Marco a liability became part of the case. Did he order Marco's death? Prosecutors couldn't prove that. Did he know his father wanted Marco neutralized? That became harder for him to deny. When Rachel explained it, Dante sat very still. So he may never be convicted from Marco. No, she said. He looked at me. I waited. There had been a time when uncertainty like that would have sent Dante looking for his own version of justice. Instead, he nodded once. I understand. I could see how much it cost him. That was the point. Choosing not to become the worst version of yourself usually doesn't feel satisfying when you make the choice. It just feels unfinished. 3 months later, Dante entered a plea agreement. Illegal gambling, extortion-related protection payments, financial reporting offenses. He surrendered control of several companies, paid enormous penalties, accepted a prison sentence shorter than what he might have faced without cooperation. The newspapers called it the fall of 2 Chicago dynasties. Dante hated the word dynasty. So dramatic. You are literally a mafia boss going to prison. Former. Growth. We sat in his nearly empty office the night before sentencing. Most of the art was gone. The room echoed. "You should hate me," he said. "I tried. Didn't take. I'm excellent at multitasking." He looked at me. "I used you." "Yes. I should have told you. Yes, I'm sorry. I waited. No explanation, no excuse." "Good. What happens to us?" I looked out at the city. "I don't know." He nodded. That answer hurt him. I could see it, and I didn't rush to soften it. Not because I wanted revenge, because uncertainty belonged to me too. "You're not asking me to wait?" "No." "You're not asking me to visit?" "No." "You're terrible at romance." "So I've heard." His mouth twitched, then his eyes went wet. "Barely. I meant it eventually." "What?" "You, not the evidence, not Evan." I swallowed. "Eventually is the problem." "I know." The next morning Dante was sentenced. I did not stand beside him. I sat behind his attorney, close enough to see him. Far enough to remember that loving someone does not make you responsible for saving them from consequences they earned. When the judge finished, Dante turned once. Our eyes met. I didn't smile, neither did he. Love was not absolution, and if Dante ever wanted a future with me, he was going to have to understand that completely. Evan's trial began 11 months after the fire. By then I had learned that justice mostly moves through calendars, hearings, continuances, depositions, motions. Nothing about it looks like television. There is much more waiting, and much worse coffee. My company survived. Barely. The Professional Licensing Board suspended its investigation after forensic examiners proved my authentication token had been cloned through software installed on Evan's home network. Our home network. That detail stayed with me. He had probably done it while I was cooking dinner 10 feet away. Maybe while I was asking whether he wanted pasta or takeout. That was the part Betrayal kept teaching me. Terrible things can happen in extremely ordinary rooms. Eventually, the board cleared me completely. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Luis opened champagne. I reminded him that I hated champagne. "Today you're drinking victory." "It tastes exactly like carbonated regret." "Drink." I did. It tasted terrible. I drank another glass anyway. Charlotte testified before me. She wore navy, no jewelry, no engagement ring. Evan watched her walk into the courtroom. For the first time, I saw something close to regret on his face. Not moral regret, loss. Charlotte had been useful to him. Then she had chosen not to be. She told the jury about Bellamy Capital's investment, the messages, the archive, the fire. The moment Evan threatened her family's money when she started asking questions. His attorney tried to paint her as a bitter fiancé. Charlotte looked at him. "You mean former fiancé?" I nearly laughed. The judge did not. When it was my turn, I took the oath and sat down. Then I told the truth. 5 years with Evan, the breakup, the forged approvals, the federal investigation, my company nearly collapsing, the fire. The prosecutor asked, "Did you ever authorize Mr. Whitmore to use your professional credentials after your relationship ended?" "No." "During the relationship?" "No." Then Evan's attorney stood. "Miss Reed, you had access to Mr. Whitmore's home and electronic devices." "Yes." "You also benefited socially and professionally from that relationship." I stared at him. "Socially? You attended events, met clients, made connections. I also attended Thanksgiving with his mother. I wouldn't call that a benefit." A few jurors laughed. The judge did not. "Still worth it." The attorney continued. "After Mr. Whitmore became engaged to another woman, you began a relationship with his closest friend." "Yes." "Dante Russo." "Yes." "A known organized crime figure." "Yes." "Isn't it possible this entire accusation was revenge?" I looked at Evan, then back at his attorney. "No." "Why not?" "Because revenge would require me to care whether Evan regretted losing me." The courtroom went quiet. "I care that he used my name to commit crimes." That was the truth. Simple enough that I did not need to decorate it. The jury convicted Evan on most counts. Wire fraud, bribery conspiracy, obstruction, credential fraud, conspiracy connected to the archive fire. Not everything. Enough. Richard was convicted separately. His sentence was longer. Several Whitmore properties tied to the criminal enterprise were forfeited, and the company entered court-supervised restructuring. Bellamy Capital recovered part of its investment. Charlotte left Chicago for 6 months. When she came back, we met for coffee. She sat down across from me. Are we friends? I don't know. That's fair. You're still annoying. You're still judgmental. I nodded, promising start. We became friends slowly. No dramatic sisterhood, no speeches about women supporting women, just texts, lunch, a few arguments, occasional insults, real friendship. Dante served his sentence at a federal facility in Pennsylvania. I visited once during the first year. Once, he looked different, less polished, same eyes. How's the hotel? He asked. Open, profitable, annoyingly, good. I hate that you sound proud. I am. We sat across from each other at a plastic table near a vending machine. Nothing about the room was romantic, probably useful. I miss you, he said. I looked down at my hands. That's inconvenient. Yes, I miss you too. His face changed. I raised one finger. Don't. I wasn't going to say anything. You were. I was going to breathe. Suspicious. He smiled. Then I said, missing you doesn't mean I'm waiting. I know. That mattered. He did not ask me to wait. He did not ask me to promise anything. He just nodded. I left after 45 minutes. Outside, I made it halfway across the parking lot before I started crying. I sat in my car until it passed. Then I wiped my face, drank terrible vending machine coffee I had brought with me for some reason, and drove home. Healing turned out to be humiliatingly ordinary. No soundtrack, no perfect speech. Some days I felt strong. Some days I searched Evan's sentencing updates at midnight and hated myself afterward. Some days I missed Dante. Some days I was relieved he wasn't anywhere near me. Both things could be true. The Calumet House reopened fully the following spring. The restored ballroom hosted its first jazz festival. Hundreds of people came. I stood near the back and watched light move across the plaster ceiling we had saved. Luis handed me a drink. Proud, terrified, same thing. No, close enough. After midnight, when the guests were gone, I walked through the ballroom alone. The building had almost burned. My company had almost died. My reputation had nearly gone with it. I touched the restored brass railing. Buildings keep scars. Good restoration does not erase them. It stabilizes what survived and leaves enough of the damage visible that nobody can pretend it never happened. I understood that better now. I wasn't becoming the woman I had been before Evan. She trusted too easily. I wasn't becoming someone Dante had designed either. For the first time in years, I was building a life without asking which man it needed to fit around. That felt quieter than victory, but much more real. Dante came home 19 months later. I did not pick him up. My mother was surprised. You love him, she said over the phone. I also love sleep. I don't drive 3 hours for that. Naomi, he needs to come home without me turning his release into a romantic event. She was quiet for a second. That sounds healthy. Don't sound so shocked. I raised you. There. Dante spent his first few months rebuilding what remained of his legitimate businesses. Court-appointed monitors reviewed everything: hotels, restaurants, real estate. The Calumet House stayed under independent management. He no longer controlled the organization that had once made people lower their voices when he entered a room. Some older Russo associates hated him for cooperating. Others quietly disappeared into retirement. Chicago kept moving. Cities are good at surviving people who once believed they owned them. My life moved too. Reed Preservation Studio reopened in a larger office. Not because I suddenly became rich, because we got work, real work. Historic schools, 2 theaters, municipal projects, a train station restoration I had wanted since graduate school. The new sign went up on a Monday morning. I stood on the sidewalk staring at it longer than necessary. Luis came outside. You're crying. Wind. There is no wind. Historic wind. Sure. My professional license had been fully restored. Federal investigators formally classified me as a fraud victim rather than a participant. My insurance premiums remained offensive. Apparently justice comes with administrative fees. Charlotte joined the board of Bellamy Capital and introduced compliance rules her father described as aggressive. She took that as a compliment. Evan received a long federal sentence. Richard received longer. The Whitmore name remained on buildings all over Chicago. For a while, seeing it still made something tighten in my stomach. Then one day, it didn't. I didn't notice the exact moment that changed. Maybe that was the point. Dante waited 4 months before contacting me. No assistant, no driver, just a text. Coffee? I stared at it for 11 minutes, then typed, "Coffee is not dinner." His reply came almost immediately. Growth. I laughed. We met at a small cafe where nobody cared who he used to be. Dante arrived early, no security detail, no black sedan, a used SUV was parked outside. I looked through the window. What happened to your dignity? Court supervision. It looks practical. Don't ruin this. We drank coffee, talked about work, my mother, his nephew, the White Sox. Nothing important. Everything important. When we finished, he asked, "Can I see you again?" I studied him. Maybe. Cruel. Accountability. He smiled. That was how we started again. Slowly. Coffee, lunch, a walk along the lake, dinner after 2 months. I paid half. He complained. I enjoyed it. We argued too, but differently. When Dante disagreed with me, he stopped treating the room like a board he could rearrange until he got the answer he wanted. When I got scared, I got better at saying I was scared instead of pretending sarcasm counted as communication. Mostly. Almost a year after he came home, we were sitting in the empty Calumet ballroom after an event. Dante looked up at the restored ceiling. "You saved this place." "We saved it." He looked at me. "You just said we. Don't make it weird." Too late. Then he reached into his coat. My whole body froze. He noticed. "Relax. That sentence has a terrible history with men." He laughed and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Not a ring." I frowned. "What is that?" "A lease. Romantic. For an office." "Whose?" "Mine." His restaurant group needed a smaller headquarters. He wanted my firm to evaluate the building. I stared at him. "You're asking me professionally?" "Yes." "No secret agenda?" "No." "No hidden evidence?" "No revenge?" "No. That's disappointingly mature." "I'm experimenting." I took the paper, sent it to Luis. His face fell. "Why?" "He handles intake." Dante stared at me for 2 seconds. Then I started laughing. So did he. He kissed me. No orchestra, no dramatic lighting. Just 2 people in an old ballroom that had survived more than either of us wanted to admit. Months later, Dante proposed at home. No restaurant. No crowd. No family waiting for an answer. He put the ring on the kitchen counter instead of holding it out like a prize. "I want to marry you," he said. "But you don't owe me yes." I stared at him. That sentence mattered more than the ring. Evan had made marriage sound like admission into a club I had failed to qualify for. Dante made it a question, a real one I could answer without fear that the wrong answer would cost me my place in somebody else's life. "Yes," he exhaled. Then I added, "I'm choosing the venue, obviously." We married at the Calumet house the following spring. Small ceremony, no politicians, no society pages. Charlotte sat with my family. Louise cried and denied it. Dante's nephew gave a speech revealing several childhood crimes that were hopefully beyond any statute of limitations. My mother danced with everyone. At one point, I slipped away and stood near the ballroom doors. The building had survived abandonment, fraud, fire, bad wiring, so had I. Dante came over. "You okay?" "Yes." "Planning an escape?" "I know all the exits." He smiled. Then the photographer called us. "Naomi, Dante, we need you." Photographs. I almost laughed. Years earlier, I had asked Evan whether I had been good enough for everything except the photographs. The question no longer hurt, because I finally understood how wrong the question had been. I had spent 5 years believing being chosen as someone's wife would prove my value. Then I spent another year proving I could survive not being chosen. Both gave men too much authority. Marriage was not the prize. Dante was not the prize. Even justice was not the prize. The real victory was much quieter. Nobody else got to decide what I was worth. Not Evan. Not his family. Not Dante. Not mine. Me. The photographer waved again. I looked at Dante. He held out his hand, not pulling, not directing, just offering. I took it and walked toward the camera because, this time, the photograph was one I had chosen to be in.